Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Knuckle Dragger. Knuckle Dragger is a unique action-oriented tabletop role-playing game that is built into a virtual tabletop. It's one of the first of its kind, and it's currently on Kickstarter. The gamer interface gives players more control in Knuckle Dragger. It keeps you more engaged. There is automatic tracking, which means the small details aren't going to get lost in the shuffle, and there's a unique combat system that's lightning fast, even in atypical combat settings. Skill checks and challenges are determined by fast mini games. How awesome is that? With difficulty determined by your PC's skill. For example, the stronger you are, the easier the strength mini game is. You can do skill checks simultaneously, which leads to faster, wilder combats and more interesting, realistic group challenges. Knuckle Dragger sounds amazing because NPCs are automatically tracked, including disposition to specific players. Games will always have a free-to-play version, but for $5, players get access to a new expansion every single month. Knuckle Dragger sounds incredible. It's on Kickstarter right now, and you are going to want to check it out. Okay, so head on over to Kickstarter and check out Knuckle Dragger. You will be glad you did. Tell them DSPN sent you. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, we are chatting with the one, the only, Kikka Delarose. Kikka is an incredible role player, a game designer, an actual player. She is amazing, and I cannot wait to tell you more about her. So here's my interview. Okay, everybody, now I am here with one of my favorite people on the internet. Kikka, welcome to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh, I bet you say every guest is your favorite.
I say every guest is one of my favorites.
Well, I guess that's why they're on your show.
That's right.
Yes, well, I'm Kikka Delarose. I do a lot of actual play streams where I'm mostly a cast member. I sometimes DM, but my anxiety sort of makes that difficult. I also put together inclusivity panels that typically are at PAX events. We had our second queer and non-European world building panel at PAX Unplugged, and at PAX East, this will be my first place saying it, but I just got approved to have a panel on roleplay aftercare.
Oh, congratulations. That's a great topic.
Yeah. I also have designed one little small game, which is on itch right now, which is a single page RPG with like a 30 minute to 1 hour length, which is about communication and how it's weird and how you can never really be too sure if you're on the same page as someone else.
Yes, I cannot wait to talk to you more about that. But before we get into game design and all of the amazing things that you do in our community, take me back. When did you first play a tabletop role-playing game?
Oh, gosh. It was actually a lot later than my interest in tabletop gaming started. My first actual formal game with dice and everything was back in probably 2010 online with a group of online people that I met through DeviantArt of all places. We played in a chat room and it was very text-based, but we also had an in-chat bot for rolling out numbers, and this was in D&D 4th edition. But I originally got interested in role-playing games back when I was very young. It wasn't that long after I got into Magic the Gathering, which was back in like 95. So I was 7 at the time that I got in Magic. And I think it was about 2 years later that I started picking up like Dungeons and Dragons books and also like the novelizations. Though my first core book was the Forgotten Realms third edition box, which was significantly later. Before that, I was like picking up like side modules, was just like content that I was interested in reading over. So it's kind of like a weird question to ask when I started. I also did some like informal diceless, like more like fantasy improv games with some friends at school occasionally. Like if we were bored, we would just be like, well, I'm playing this character who's an assassin and they're in X town that we both know of in the Forgotten Realms setting, and they're doing Y, and the other person is like, okay, so tavern, keep yada yada yada, et cetera, sort of thing.
That is interesting, and I hear that story a lot from people that, you know, they sort of grew up consuming D&D content before they actually played like a role-playing game.
Yeah, like D&D was kind of like the counterculture of nerddom back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. It was sort of like the cool kind of thing that you wanted to get into, but you didn't quite know how. Like listening to metal.
Right. Yeah. And it was a thing, you know, a lot of people had sort of like lonely fun with it, I think is one way that people describe it, of reading the books and consuming the content.
Well, it's only lonely if you feel lonely.
That's true. And one of the first things I saw was a panel with you last year at PAX, or I guess not last year anymore, 2018 PAX Unplugged, where you spoke a lot about the Forgotten Realms, but then you also talked about your love of Spelljammer and all these things, and it was clear that you have like a deep knowledge of D&D lore.
It's deep in certain areas and very shallow in other areas. Yeah, a lot of my interest, especially with Forgotten Realms, has been through a lot of the R.A. Salvatore novels. I was very proud to get him to sign my AD&D DM's guide at Emerald City Comic Con 2019. But yeah, doing a lot of stuff on your own lends you to have like a depth of knowledge that can be kind of intimidating on the outside looking in, but there's always a lot of blind spots in just knowledge. And also it's okay to just throw a bunch of stuff out the window. Like who really cares so long as you're having fun?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So at what point then did you get more involved in the community?
It's very kind of roundabout. I reconnected with someone from that I knew when I was in high school, when I was involved in a theatrical samurai sword fighting acting group. For 2 years, I knew them, and they introduced me to their online gaming group, which also had a few smaller game designers, but they mostly did play tests of smaller games, and they got me like on Roll20, and like back when Roll20 was like in the beta stages, you know, and they got me more into the online stuff. And then Wax Steven, who I think does Table Story, a Pathfinder game he had me on for a while. And also he would do this thing where every week he would have a guest on his show, and then everything was randomized, the setting, the characters, the stats, just everything, and people just had to take like what they were given and run with it, him included. And it was a lot of fun, and he had me on there for a while. And that's sort of how I got more into the Twitch tabletop gaming space. And from there, I got invited onto Henley's stream for a few different games, most memorable of which would be his long-running Mouse Guard game with Eric Vulgaris, was the DM, who is like one of my favorite people and like one of my best friends, and he's great.
A great human, an amazing human.
Yeah. And through Eric, Eric connected me with Grant Ellis, who had me on the Greyhawk channel doing his Giants game. And that year I just decided to, that was the year where sort of everything started like really getting going, where I decided that every single character I was going to play was going to be openly trans, because I was in a place where I desperately needed more trans representation in the tabletop gaming space. So I decided to make it. Like, it's like a heck, just let me do this myself kind of thing. Yeah, I just decided to push to be on more streams, like be more proactive to in networking and getting in games, and just I decided to say yes to everything, which ended up putting me on like 7 streams a week for a while.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it is amazing the amount of stuff that you have been on. You were and you've been a guest on a lot of streams as well. I know I saw you as a frequent guest on Dice Camera Action when that was still running.
I really enjoyed being on the show. It definitely meant a lot to me that I was invited on, given that my Chickenfoot Coven character's description started with the 3 words, a trans woman. Mm-hmm. Like, it was very important to me to have that representation, like, very upfront and open. And the fact that my character was chosen was great. And my biggest regret is that we couldn't get into her overly complicated backstory, which was like many pages long, just because I wanted excuses to continue stirring up DCA lore.
So if you would like to, I would like to give you, Kikka, the opportunity to get into the background of your DCA character. If you want to, we could do it right here, right now, if you want to give the overview of what it is. So this, I will, for people who are listening who don't watch Dice Camera Action, the Chickenfoot Coven was the coven of one of the characters, almost like an apprenticeship program too. There were 3 characters, one of whom was played by Kikka, who were chosen through a contest, like a character creation contest on D&D Beyond. And then they showed up and they were part of Strix's Strix, played by Holly Conrad's coven on the show. And they were at first kind of put to, they had to then, your characters had to go through a test to join the coven. And then once they were part of the coven, they would like actually go on adventures together and stuff. And it was very fun to watch. It was a great crew of people. So tell us a little bit about your character.
Oh gosh, I also do want to say that my character was personally tested by Evelyn, who was played by Anna Prosser, who I actually first met through D&D because she guested on Wax Stevens' show where everything was randomized, and she ended up being a very lazy fighter, and my character was a very like proactive fighter. So half the game, like, it was just me carrying her character on my character's back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was very fun. So it was a treat to play with her again. But my character goes by the name Dear Nahal, which isn't her real name. It actually is the word secret twice in 2 different dead languages. She is a Shadowkai from the Shadowfell who ran away from the Shadowfell to escape the like overwhelming depression and also the eye of the Raven Queen after Dear Nahal stole a secret which she thought was so amazing and precious that she didn't want to give it up to the Raven Queen. Her leaving the Shadowfell and going to Waterdeep was also very much about her having the opportunity to transition and figure herself out and learn how to be a happy person. But I took the hermit background for this character, and as part of it, it says that you, like, you know, pick a secret that you can have that is something that you just uncovered, and it's unique and powerful, and it says, work with your DM to determine the details of your discovery and its impact on the campaign. So I messaged Chris Perkins asking if there was any limitation on this, like what the bounds should be, and he was just like, oh, I don't care, just go wild. So
Yes. Yes.
The story of like that particular secret was, at the time, I was going back and reading a lot of first edition stuff, like with the Netherim and things like that. And at the same time that I was reading all this stuff about the Shatterkai and the Raven Queen. And for context first, a little bit about the Raven Queen. The Raven Queen is this very powerful pseudo deity almost. Like, she's not quite full on deity status, but she's pretty close. And the story of how she ended up there was after the elves left their paradise, like Avondor. That is where the elves lived, in just this pristine paradise where they were even free of their own physical forms, and they could just, project themselves in any which way they wanted to, and it was great. It was paradise. They got tricked by, I think, Lolth into leaving, and yada yada yada, things with elf gods. Anyway, the Raven Queen was this powerful elf mage who wanted to be able to forge a way for the elves to get back there using magic. So they performed a ritual to basically funnel power into her so that she could attain godhood, so she could bring the elves back there. But she was betrayed during this process. I don't know quite the details, but I think it was some other mages decided to try to siphon this power like off of the ritual to use for themselves. And that caused everything to go wrong. She basically kind of just got torn asunder by this magic and ended up becoming a being that just existed as magic itself, and eventually recoalesced into this sort of facsimile of her former self that sort of has this attachment to the elves, but kind of not. And who or what she is kind of weird and ephemeral and kind of hard to pin down. But she basically just exists as like a being of magic who is very powerful, but isn't quite a god yet. And the elves that were loyal to her got like pulled into the Shadowfell and became Shatterkai. Yeah, it's pretty fun and interesting to think about. More on that later. Jumping over to what I was reading about in first edition was the Netherim and the great mages who made these cities out of like floating mountaintops that basically they just like hewed the tops of the spires of mountains off and like flipped them upside down and put cities on them and had those cities floating in the sky because they just had so much darn magic. And the most powerful and most arrogant of these the mages of these cities was Karsus, who was he was like a magic genius, but also like very arrogant kind of head. Very well known, very famous anyway. With that context, there was also this race of magic consuming entities that were drawn into the physical plane Faerûn. They were attracted to the magic. They came into the prime material plane on I think Toril is the name of like the planet that Forgotten Realms is on. But they came in and were like going to like crazy, consuming magic, messing things up, and very much like ended up being directly opposed to the Netherim, and were causing a lot of issues, especially when you have magic-eating entities consuming the magic that makes it so your cities stay suspended in the air. It's a bit of an issue. So Karsus wanted to find a way to just deal with this issue once and for all. And he ended up making the only 12th level spell in Dungeons and Dragons, which was I believe an 8-hour ritual that one uses to siphon the power from a chosen deity and take it on for themselves. So he did this ritual, and in his arrogance, he was like, I'm going to take the power of Mistral, the goddess of magic, of all magic, the person that's holding the weave together. I'm going to mess with her powers. That's a good idea. But he did it. He did that and then just like quickly discovered that part of what Mistral does was hold the entirety of the weave together and make sure everything's stable and keeps magic from failing. So right when he did that, like all of magic in the realm sort of cut out for a second. All the cities that were floating in the sky just fell. Most of them crashed and were destroyed. Things were just horrible. He could not control any of it. And he ended up just getting destroyed by Mistral killed herself to destroy him as well, and basically just reset herself so that she could reset magic and save the realm from this catastrophe that Karsus was inadvertently causing.
Got it. Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So, yeah, it's really cool. And so things going wrong while wielding absurd amounts of magic power, does that sound familiar in any way?
Yes. Things going wrong while wielding absurd amounts of magical power does sound very familiar to me.
Yeah. I thought it seemed very similar to the story of the Raven Queen.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was possibly plausible for Karsus to eventually have survived in some sort of strange form like the Raven Queen and just had been taking a very long time to recoalesce themselves into their own sort of magic power being.
Got it. Oh.
So I said, well, I guess that's what Deer in a Hall discovered, is that Karsus did that and survived. So I was just basically using a dice camera action as an excuse to reintroduce Karsus, and by extension the Netherim and the Faerim, into Forgotten Lore present era canon.
Oh, that is amazing. I love that. What is so fun about all of this is that you have such rich backstory, and your characters do seem fully developed when they show up on screen. What advice would you have for people who are going to play in an actual play, stream or podcast or YouTube show, whatever it may be, as far as creating characters goes?
Oh, I don't know if my advice is the best, because it kind of causes a good amount of bleed. But I typically take just one little small aspect of myself and use that as a basis to build a whole other person around. So I'm basically kind of building an extra personality off of myself, and that is my character. But it's very useful for making complex characters who have a lot of depth, because you already kind of know intuitively how they're going to react to situations, even if they're not even closely like yourself. They've had all these other experiences, but if you take something that is very core to yourself and build around that in different directions, you can go in very interesting ways, and also figure out new things about yourself as well. People tend to be have a lot more depth than people realize. Even people tend to also not realize how much depth they have themselves, especially when you have a lot of parts of yourself that you just don't even really think about and take for granted. So it kind of, leads to therapy.
Yeah, well, I do think you're right. I think people really don't know a lot about themselves. And, we live in a day and age where, especially with the internet, everything that we choose to share is scrutinized, right? And it can make us feel even more self-conscious or timid about things that really should be strengths in some cases. And I think a lot of times we get into D&D and it's I hit things with a sword, and that is what I do. We don't necessarily see a character fully develop until maybe much later in a session when they've sort of been faced with questions that the player, has not bothered to ask before jumping in. It seems like you ask yourself a lot of those questions before play starts, which is really great, and a gift to game masters who get to play with you, I would imagine.
Yeah, you don't even need like a super complicated backstory for that, so long as you have a very good, like, what is at the emotional core of this character and what sort of like basic experiences have they had built on top of this. Or even if you're just going in with like a character that you're just given, like, you just slap a emotional component on that and then think, how did they get from this emotional core to being this character where they are right now, and then just continue off in that direction and lean into like how they would be creative, how they would solve problems, how they would respond to challenges. It's always just about like leaning into the narrative as much as you can.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely an important thing, and sort of accepting the dungeon master's premise, right? Like the idea of we're all going to play a horror game, then come ready to be scared. Don't be like, well, make me scared now, DM.
It's all about yes and if you have ideas that could introduce more horror, scary elements into it, just field them. Like, talk to the DM, be like, hey, I think it would be kind of great if the character maybe found out that they were just a construct copy of this other character that is off adventuring and they don't even know it. And then they have to deal with the horror of trying to figure out if they're an actual person or not.
Yeah, I do. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I'm sure TK has covered that at some point.
They are a incredible writer and master of horror.
God, I love TK. Their stuff is so good.
So amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy are the makers of many fine RPG products that you can use at your table. I'm talking about these handcrafted wood and leather and metal beautiful things made to carry your dice around in, roll dice, carry cards around in, anything you want. My favorite are the spell book boxes. They are these wood boxes covered in leather. They have these embossed designs on the front. They are beautiful. I have two of them. You can get custom inserts for carrying around dice, minis, pencils, cards, whatever you want. Plus, there's a mirror on the inside that works as whiteboard. You can use the thing as a rolling tray as well. They're just super versatile and like the most beautiful thing that I bring to the table. So go check it out. Okay, go check it out right now at elderwoodacademy.com/don't-split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't-split. Let's get back to the babble. So I think what I would, want to know about you is your game design stuff. So how did you get into designing a game? You said, you do have a one-page RPG that we're going to get into right now, but you've also got other stuff that you're working on. When did you decide, I'd like to try my hand at making some stuff that I'd put out there for other people to check out?
I decided to start actually making games beyond just having these fun ideas like, wouldn't it be cool if there was this game? When I kind of realized that there were things that I wanted to express to other people that they kind of would need to experience to really understand. A lot of this comes back to my own issues with communication and getting ideas across, because I am an abuse survivor who's trans, who has social anxiety, who's an introvert, who has some asocial tendencies, and also was brought up in an environment that wasn't really conducive to learning how to communicate well. So I was like, I don't know how to express my feelings regarding communication. So I'm going to make a game based on the premise that you have to try to communicate with someone, but you can't use words or gestures, and they can't even see you and they can't even hear you because it feels like you can't just be seen or heard by people a lot of times. So that you just can't. And the only way you can communicate by communicate your emotional needs and boundaries to another person is via moving stuff around. And that's where A Lonely Haunt came from, which I called Ghost Game for a long time, because the premise is both players are ghosts who, since they're both ghosts, they can't see or hear each other. And they can only connect and communicate via manipulating the environment that they're in ghost ways.
So what are some ghost ways of manipulating the environment?
Well, in playtest situations, people typically start out very simple. You could say you're in a factory and there is a broken pane of glass. You could rearrange the shards of glass into various shapes. You can move them in particular patterns. You could have them sort of tinkle against the ground to make certain noises. So long as you're not using words to communicate, then you can sort of find these interesting ways of communicating these concepts. Like you can have like a stick and a rock move in twisting ways around themselves, like they're dancing to depict a certain kind of relationship. So long as you're just making like statements using objects instead of words, then you're communicating things without even saying what you're communicating, which kind of is what communication is. You're using sounds and noises and grunts to express these complex ideas that you can't actually just beam into someone else's head. So it's kind of making people think about how they engage with communication and sort of forge new connections via alternative means of communicating.
That is pretty incredible.
It's a very fun game, and most people have found it very enriching so far.
What is the name of the game for people if they want to find it?
It's called A Lonely Haunt.
Lonely Haunt. That is such a cool idea for a game. I love that, and I love one-page role-playing games because you can sit down and play them. And the idea is this is a two-player RPG?
Yeah, it's a little two-player RPG. I didn't want to get things too complicated. I wanted to keep things very simple and streamlined and have it be like a very personal, like intimate game.
So you also said before we got rolling here that you have a lot of other ideas that you're sort of working on. Is there anything that you can tell me about those projects?
Yeah, there is a game that I started working on as like part of the RPG Writers Workshop, but I didn't end up finishing it through that because it didn't quite connect, because it was it started off as an idea for like a little adventure into a domain of dread in D&D, but then it was like, well, what I'm trying to say doesn't really fit this D&D system, and it kind of needs to go in this completely different direction, and ended up going off into its own little 2-stat game, because I don't like things getting too bogged down in mechanics. Like, mechanics can be fun and can lead to very interesting ideas and ways of engaging, but what that game called for ended up needing to be like very mechanics light. Still working on the name, but if I just go off of the 2 stats, then the name of the game is Lost and Found, where it's a game where the game runner, the GM, whatever you want to call it, takes the role of a child going through an emotional time in their life. And the worlds that the players interact in is that child's imagination, that it's built off that child's impression of the world around them and their impression of themselves. and the players take the roles of that child's imaginary friends. And the goal is for the players to help that child like emotionally grow and move on from like through this very intense part of their life.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's two stat RPG system where the two stats are lost and found. Lost is dealing with performing actions outside of your like socially defined role, and found is acting within those bounds. So it's a lot of like it sort of is reflecting the process of reevaluating who you are and sort of growing in this very loose, ephemeral way. And if you go too far into Lost, you sort of lose sense of yourself and sort of become like a loose, very ephemeral thing that has a hard time really engaging with the world around them. But if you become too found, your character loses like sense of individuality and becomes like a very rigid caricature of itself. And there are ways of coming back from that, like, but that requires intervention from the other players and stuff like that.
Yeah, that is so interesting. It seems like you like to make games that are around sort of very human themes and get people to connect with themselves on a deeper level and think about themselves. And it sort of relates back to what you were saying earlier about people don't necessarily know themselves as well as they think they do.
Yeah, like the more I learn about myself, the more that I feel like I barely know myself. And I don't know, I'm always reevaluating where I am with things and where I am with the world. And I guess I kind of want to express the ways that I'm doing that to others and also give other people a good time in ways that could help them out too. So a lot of that is very much a reflection of that. But on the other hand, I'm also making a Powered by the Apocalypse game that's about fighting ghosts. So
right. Let's talk about that because that's great too.
Oh God, that is just me being a huge weeb. It's a very anime-inspired ghost fighting game. Well, it's not just ghosts, but also engaging with various mythologies and mythological creatures and either expelling them or like working with them to calm them. And how you engage with them like can vary depending on who your characters are and what the various entity is. And it comes from my love of just over the top anime magic. And I really need to talk to more people who I need consultants for this one before I even like get close to going past where I'm at now, because I definitely want to put a lot of very different traditions from different cultures into this. So it's one of those things where I want to see if I can get the group together and then raise some money so I can pay people and then have that all made with a great group of very creative people to go out and let people fight ghosts.
Oh, that is excellent. And like all of the games, it sounds like you are working on, it's got a range of interests. Although ghosts is a common theme. So spirits.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that, like, after I was talking about ghosts. It's just like, dang, I talk about dead things a lot.
Do you think that you have an affinity for the goth, I don't know what to call it, genre, feel, goth mood?
I mean,
are you goth?
It's very common for trans kids to go through a goth phase. Let's be real.
Okay.
But I definitely had a huge goth phase. But I think my connection with more macabre things and dead things in games is more the coming from an emotional place of trauma survival, how things that are technically gone and dead can still linger and stay with you for ages after and still affect you in these very painful ways. And a lot of this is expressing like moving past that in using various different methods, be them healthy, unhealthy, partially healthy, like mixed bags. Things are very complicated.
So, Kika, I know you wanted to expand a bit your thoughts on the subjects of undead, trauma, and inspiration. Can you tell me more about that?
I don't want to perpetuate the very unhealthy stereotype of the like tortured artist who needs to be very sad and depressed to be able to make great art. Actually, it's kind of contrary to that because a lot of the times people have far more trouble producing any sort of artistic output when they are going through very dark and difficult experiences, even though through making art can be very therapeutic and help people get through feelings. It's also something that needs to be fought against a lot. And you have like a lot of people who are making amazing work from very different inspirations and sources and emotional places. And I just don't want to reinforce harmful stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really really smart. And it's important. I think when we talk about art, because art is so personal, right? To have those discussions and to say, talk about your personal point of view, but also reinforce good and healthy things as well.
Yeah. Like about a week after we recorded initially, I actually started drafting a game that is more based on my love of music and learning music, and it also my love of kind of trashy CW drama shows.
What? Tell me more. Tell me more.
I don't feel like I'm at the stage in like conception where I can get too in depth about it, but um, general basic idea is I want to make a game about attending a music academy and have it be kind of competitive and mostly about petty drama and romance, honestly, with music as a way of setting tone and expressing things mechanically.
Yeah, yeah, wow. We need to talk about your panels because they are legendary, legendary. And if you are at a PAX, you need to see a panel with Kikka Delarose. It is a must. It is a moral imperative. Talk to me a little bit about your diversity panels. You have really made it part of your mission to make the community more accepting of diverse voices, to lift up more diverse voices, to become more welcoming to different types of people. And I think it's a great thing. So you have a lot of panels that are centered around diversity. What goes into them, and why should people check them out?
Yeah, I originally started wanting to do panels because back when I first decided that every single character I'm going to play is going to be openly trans because I need to make sure trans people feel welcome in the gaming community. Back then, I did a big Twitter thread on like directed at wizards talking about why they should include trans people, how they could do it, the importance of having trans like voices present in the systems. And a lot of people had bad faith arguments against it and were responding with these very bad explanations of why they shouldn't have to add any trans characters at all in Dungeons and Dragons. And this was back before Dragon Heist, before there were really any instances of canonically trans characters in all of D&D. But after, there were trans characters in Pathfinder and stuff, and cutting out a lot of in between content. That's eventually led me to decide that I needed to have put up spaces where we could have more in-depth conversation on these topics of inclusivity and representation and the importance of it, and also addressing negative, very bad examples of quote unquote inclusivity, basically just stereotyping in tabletop gaming in general. And I first started with at PAX, at the PAX Unplugged 2018, that same one where you saw me on the lore panel. I also had a panel on transgender representation in tabletop gaming, where we went over the past 30 years of bad representation in tabletop gaming, and then the past maybe 5 years of pretty good, okay representation.
But still definitely far from perfect.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but oh gosh, shout out to Crystal Fraser. She did some great work with Pathfinder, with getting trans characters in there and forward, and just amazing job. I'm infinitely grateful to the things that she's done in the community. But beyond that, I was I recognized that I shouldn't be making spaces for just myself and raising up my own voice, because we're all in this together. And frankly, more diverse games make for better games, and I want everyone to be involved. So I then started doing putting together panels at PAX East on first respectfully role-playing outside of your own identity, for people that want to be able to put more diverse characters in their games, but don't have a very big friend group, or making sure that people had the tools and the knowledge to make sure that they are creating accepting, inclusive spaces with lots of diverse representation, especially in streamed games and stuff. And then at PAX, at that next PAX West 2019, and this past PAX Unplugged, I put together panels on queer and non-Eurocentric world building, because a lot of diversity needs to happen from the ground up in building a world. If you just tack things on, it feels, tacked on. But having a lot of worlds that are just built off of a lot of mythology and history that isn't directly influenced by Tolkien leads to very interesting settings. I had Mike Ballas and Elwarius, who are on Tres Albas. I'm bad with pronouncing non-English words that aren't Japanese, because the only languages I've ever taken were English and Japanese, but they do amazing work in building a world that is built off of a lot of Central American mythology and history. And it's so unique and wonderful. And also I had other POC and queer content creators talking about making sure that there's actual characters who are notable, who are of diverse backgrounds, making sure that their diverse backgrounds actually include their own diversity, their own culture and heritage and stuff, instead of just being this character is black and gay, nothing else. Meh. That's it. They're just character tags. But yeah, the PAX Unplugged one is a panel that's been recorded and is online now. And the responses to those panels have been great. We've been beyond capacity for every single one so far. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my act together for getting another one of those at PAX East this year because not only were things really crazy after PAX Unplugged, but also I will not be attending PAX East, so I need to make sure that other people that I trust are running panels for me for events that I'm not going to. Thankfully, I was able to get stuff together for the aftercare panel that will be at PAX East, but I ran out of time for submission for the other stuff.
So you should totally check out any panel, as I have said before, that Kikka is a part of, be it the organizer of the panel or not. But Kikka, my question to you would be, what is aftercare for people who don't know, and why is it important?
Basically, aftercare is taking time after a session, a gaming session, to make sure everybody is in a good place and in a healthy place emotionally. And if they're not doing things to sort of bring them out of these emotionally intense places, especially with like very intense game sort of content and things, because like you mentioned horror earlier, if you're in like a very horror centric game, there can be a lot of content that can be very emotionally intense, and your brain isn't very good at differentiating reality from fantasy when it comes to emotionally intense situations, which can make a lot of sense like when you consider the fact that a lot of social structures are just agreed upon social acts. So like a lot of society is basically built on just agreeing that things go a certain way, and the like things in society can also be like very traumatic. So if you like take that, you can see how games themselves can be very emotionally intense and stick with you, and can also lead to some minor emotional trauma. So aftercare is making sure that people can recover from sessions so that they overall don't get a negative impact to their mental health in the long run from gaming.
That's smart. It's really, really good stuff, and it is a skill that I wish I had known about, years ago when I started, because I do think it would have helped a lot of times. And everything that you are doing in this community is a really helpful and great thing, Kikka. So thank you so much for everything you do. I feel like we have just scratched the surface. I would love to have you back on if you would like to come back.
Oh, I would love to. I enjoyed talking to you very much, and thank you for letting me ramble on about my own weird musings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so excited that we got to get the secret backstory. I have an exclusive now on Tabletop Babble. This is great.
And there's more to it than just that, but I gave you the abridged version.
Well, maybe we'll have to see these characters again. I'd love to see the Chickenfoot Coven ride again, frankly.
Yeah, I would love a Chickenfoot Coven show. I love Critter and Perluck. They're such fun characters.
Yeah. The three of you, it's a dynamic trio. So I would love to see that. In the meantime, though, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Twitter at twitter.com/KikkaVO. Starting actually this evening, as of recording, Mondays on the Onyx Path channel, I am running a Chronicles of Darkness game with some of my good tabletop gaming friends. So yeah, that's on the Onyx Path Twitch channel on Mondays at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and that'll be going for about 8 to 10 weeks. And you can find me on itch. Kikka.itch.io. Very straightforward. Kikka.itch.io. Where you can get my one game so far, but hopefully 2 games soon.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That is amazing and incredible. Just like you. Kikka, thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was a great interview with Kikka. People, if you like Tabletop Babble, guess what? You can support us financially on Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/Intracasso. That's patreon.com/Intracasso. I hope this show is worth at least $1 a month to you. And if you can spare it, we would really appreciate it. Of course, there's rewards and stuff there, but the real reward is you support this show, which comes to your ears reliably every single week. Every week. And of course, if you already support the show, thank you so much. And if you want to continue to do so for free and you can't support the Patreon or you already do, if you're listening in Apple Podcasts right now, guess what? In the app, you can give us 5 stars. It'll take you 5 seconds. Just boop, pop on over, bada bing. Look, you gave us 5 stars. If not, guess what? Odds are the podcatcher app you're using uses the iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So, leave us a 5-star review. Leave a 5-star review for all the podcasts you love. If you leave us a review, I will read it out loud on the show. You can make me say anything you want, like Rontine from Canada, who left a 5-star review entitled Great Pod. Thank you, Rontine. This review reads, I've been looking for a TTRPG podcast for quite some time and stumbled upon Tabletop Babble. I think James does a great job hosting the show, and I'm finding a wide range of guests to speak with on a myriad of different topics. Well, I've only been listening for a short time. I find myself queuing Tabletop Babble closer and closer to the top of my weekly pod playlist. Great job, James. Hey, thank you so much, Routine. I really appreciate it. Hope all is well up there in the Great White North. One other thing I wanted to mention, I have gotten a cool package from WizKids, and it has got so many awesome things in it. Minis for Eberron, minis for all kinds of stuff, but I want to talk to you about the Archon the Cruel pack. So, you know Archon the Cruel, he is Joe Manganiello's character, and they have this incredible pack added to the Icons of the Realms Descent into Avernus collection, and oh man, is it awesome. It's not just Archon, who looks amazing. Archon looks amazing. It's also got Chango with the wreath of the prism around his neck, who is the manticore that Archon rides into battle. It's got Kroll, who is a death cleric turtle, looks amazing, like this big crazy snapper turtle. It's got Toro the Minotaur. There is so much awesome here. I love WizKids minis. They are just so dope. So go check it out. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Intracasso. That's at JamesIntrocasso. Also, check out my blog, World Builder Blog, which is all about the cool game design stuff that I am doing. It's at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, just wanted to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Fish in the Pot. Fish in the Pot and the Characters Collection. Fresh off the success of one-page dungeon collections and just in time for Zine Quest 2, Fish in the Pot has a brand new Kickstarter campaign that is live right now. Go and back the Fish in the Pot Character Collection to get a 20-page zine with quirky characters ready to use for your game. This collection includes merchants, artisans, scoundrels, thinkers, celebrities, professionals, and scallywags, all with loads of personality packed into their quick-to-read descriptions. This collection also includes top-shelf illustrations and features tables to randomly assign your character's personal motivations and dark secrets. Come on! The Kickstarter runs from February 16th through February 29th as part of Kickstarter's Zine Quest 2. Go check it out. Fish in the Pot and the Characters Collection.